It's 1844, and the creation of New Ash Green is to be some 120 years later. On this map, we can see Newhouse Farm, which is in the parish of Hartley. On other maps, we can also see North Ash Farm, which is in the parish of North Ash. In the early 1960s, both farms came up for auction and were purchased by Span Properties. The North Ash Farm Manor House became the headquarters of Span's New Ash Green enterprise. With the River Thames and the towns of Dartford and Gravesend in the distance, and the villages of Hartley and Longfield to the immediate north, New Ash Green sits on the top of the North Downs in the manor of North Ash. 50 years on from its creation, it is still surrounded by the outer London green belt. The names of the various neighbourhoods derive from those names shown on earlier maps of the area. In many cases, these are the names of people who at some time owned or rented farmland and worked it in order to make a living. New Ash Green itself is taken from the names of its immediate predecessors, Newhouse Farm and North Ash Farm. And the word green is taken from the area to the south of Knightscroft, previously known as Greenfield.
Of course, the whole area is steeped in history, starting from the Roman villa, which is at the back of Westfield, I think, somewhere. And you'll see it marked on the Ordnance Survey maps.
In the mid-70s, one job I had was to help mix the concrete for the floor screeding to go into, I think it was number 3 Westfield, which was the house that had to be delayed. It was delayed being built because of the Roman villa and the dig and everything around there.
Also, when the new Red Hill Road was laid, an archaeological find was made of an Iron Age ditch across the road, which showed that there was some sort of farming settlement here even before the Romans.
The Roman villa site was first excavated in 1914. It was revisited by the Kent Archaeological Society when Span gained planning approval for the whole area. At that time, Red Hill Road was still in its unmade form. It was to be some years later when the road was tarmacked.
One of the things I find very moving is the fact that a B-17 bomber had to make a crash landing right opposite the golf club down the road from New Ash Green, and the US Army came out and built a runway and took every single bit of metal out of that aeroplane and flew it out.
Chapel Wood, Coltstead, Punchcroft, The Mead, Nine Horse Wood, Oliver's Mill, Capelands and the word Spring are some of the historic names found on the old maps that are still used. Along with a Roman villa, the pond on Westfield, and the nearby church of St. Peter and St. Paul in the ancient village of Ash, they all have their roots in the past. Perhaps the most elusive of all the neighbourhood names is Knightscroft. It gets its name from the order of the Knight Hospitallers of St. John of Jerusalem. This was a Catholic military order first introduced into England during the reign of Henry I, the successor to William the Conqueror. Henry possessed property in the Manor of Ash. The manor was divided into North and South Ash during the reign of Henry III, and the manor of North Ash was given to the Knight Hospitallers. But we can't spend too much time on the past, as the new village of New Ash Green has history of its own, a 50-year-old history. A modern history as told by villagers past and present for the benefit of villagers present and the villagers of the future. Two early New Ash Green pioneers were Gail Lewis's wife Gilly and her brother Bill, both of whom recall life before the village. Their father was the local GP, Dr. Peter Reed.
My dad was Peter Reed. He was the local GP in New Ash Green, Hartley, Longfield, and Mum was a theatre sister at Joyce Green and West Hill.
I moved to Hartley when I was 14. I had actually moved around the whole local area, but my teenage years were in Hartley.
So many of you will remember Dad driving around in whatever particular car he had at the time and bowling up to your house back in the days when your GP would come out in the middle of the night. He'd get home from doing a visit maybe 4 in the morning, 4:30, and he'd go in the kitchen, he'd cook bacon and eggs.
We lived in a house called Point Hill, which is in Church Road, and I spent a lot of my teenage years sort of walking around the local area and walking up Church Road and right up to Ash, where there was absolutely nothing but green fields.
I was about 16 when they decided they were going to build this monstrosity, this modern concept in living called New Ash Green.
I was horrified actually that the whole of that area was going to be ruined by these houses that were going to be built. And there was a lot of objection, and there was a lot of political stuff that went on which I didn't understand at the time.
I mean, these were the fields that I played in. You know, there are a couple of barns that I knew pretty well because they had hay in them.
One day we were driving round in Kent and we came across a sign saying Span Kent, building here. There was no building at all. This was long before they'd started the actual building. But we thought, who on earth would want to live all the way out here?
So many people that actually objected that we decided to have, or it was decided that there would be a demonstration down at Longfield Station to show that the actual railway service would never be able to cope with the influx of people. One day we all crowded onto the upside of the station, and I was 16, I was in my school uniform, and so we joined the demonstration.
Until now, the local landscape has changed very little from the days of the tithe maps to the time that this photograph was taken. All this, of course, was shortly going to change as the building work started.
And all of a sudden, my playground is taken away by a whole lot of houses.
A few years' time, we were looking around and got wind that the building had now started.
Obviously, you know, when they were building them, it did give us a chance to go and have a look inside them. When the builders had gone home, we could go and have a look, see what was going on.
And we used to go up and look at these houses and look at the way that they were being built, and they really looked sort of rubbish.
Well, I first saw New Ash Green in 1972. It had been going for about 5 years then, I think, and I was going out with a girl who I subsequently married who lived in Hartley.
I married in 1973 and we lived in South Wimbledon. And my husband thought that it would be a good idea if we lived near my parents. And I said, that's fine, I'll move near my parents, but anywhere but New Ash Green. I'm not going to live there. My husband said, well, we can't afford anywhere else. And I said, okay, it's got to be somewhere that doesn't overlook anyone else's houses and has got sort of a rural frontage. So we bought a house on Punchcroft.
The houses, especially the Span house we had first, was one of the best designed houses I think I could possibly have lived in, and I really envy anyone who still lives in the Span houses because you can do so much with them. Eric Lyons was a visionary architect, not just in the concept of the space and the community, but just in the basic structure of the house.
Another fan of Span and Eric Lyons is Andy Nicholson. He also moved into Punchcroft.
We wanted to move to this area because there were a lot of Span houses there. Eric Lyons was the architect of the Span houses, and we were fans of that particular style.
Okay. And we saw an advert in the Evening Standard for a house on Millfield, and we went down there one dark night, walked up from the station and fell in love with the house and bought it on the spot.
In order to attract as many people as possible, Span devised a number of financing methods to help folk to move in.
Linda and I first moved to New Ash Green in 1968 to one of the new ideas that Span had of newlywed houses.
We were one of what they call the newlyweds, the flat-roofed houses on Punchcroft, and you moved in there, and all you did was you paid, I think it was £114 a month, no deposit.
Instead, the house was supplied undecorated, and Span provided the materials, and we had to do the decoration and pay rent for 6 months.
And then 6 months later, our mortgage started. So for first-time buyers, that was absolutely brilliant.
Which suited us because, although we'd saved some money for the deposit, we could now spend it on furniture. We were in this little house, number 69 Punchcroft, for 5 years.
We moved into 150 Aylands in 1975. We'd come from Hampshire, moved back up to be sort of near London for my dad's work, and there was nothing in front of Aylands. There was literally just mud and fields.
So what sold the place to us was that the previous owner had put in a third bedroom. We had 3 children. Put in the third bedroom above the second bedroom, a mezzanine room. So it was perfect for us. Plenty of room for everybody.
It's interesting talking to my mum about what it was like coming into a community like this. So it was obviously brand new. There was obviously a lot of starter homes. It was, I think, really sold as a really great place to come and bring up families. So there are a lot of young families here.
Well, it really started when I was a medical student at King's, and at that time Bill Reed, who was a very good friend, who was a dental student, was also the son of the senior partner, Peter Reed. So years pass by, you qualify, you end up as a doctor trying to find a general practice. At that time it was quite difficult, and Bill turned around and said, well, Dad's looking for a practice, why don't you apply there? So I did, and the attraction of New Ash Green was it sort of mirrored what I was, my wife was, and soon to be my family was. It was a new village with lots of young people, young children, lovely practice.
The village rapidly developed and it soon had a number of facilities to support the new residents. With this, opinions started to change, and New Ash Green started to attract new residents from all over the southeast.
The concept that Span had when they developed the village was by standing at the head of this dry valley and looking down over the village green, you'd be drawn into this thread of Kentish countryside, which was the propaganda or the sales of that Span were keen on promoting.
And we had a village hall, we had a pub, we had a youth centre, we had a school, and it was perfect. And in those days also, solicitors explained the covenants to clients, so everybody knew what they were buying into.
And I came to New Ash Green in 1972 as a 13-year-old when my mum and dad moved into Knightscroft. Dad had been working for Bovis and he was coming to New Ash Green to be the building manager after Bovis had rescued the project after the demise of Span.
I came to live on Lambards completely on a whim. We came for a ride with my father-in-law. He was looking for a new house. We saw our house had a playroom. I fell in love with it. We went home, sold our house and moved in.
So we moved into a Span show house on Knightscroft, and I did my growing up here.
The building work was still going on all round us. In fact, we were one of the earlier houses in Punchcroft, and I can remember watching the army of labourers outside the front raking and profiling the landscaping.
This sort of radically modern house on Knightscroft with bare brick walls and white paint and everything, and no wallpaper. It was a radical change, but exactly what my mum and dad wanted, I think.
As more houses were built, so the infrastructure developed. Before long, there were shops, schools and surgeries.
We were all of a sudden became advocates for New Ash Green. Having not wanted the place there, we became happy that it was there, and for me it was great because it was, you didn't have to go down to Longfield or into Dartford or Gravesend to go shopping. You just went up the road to New Ash Green.
1984 moved to Punchcroft, and the tennis courts were very nearby, and I played a bit of tennis in those days. Really convenient to have them nearby. And right next door to where we lived was the nursery school.
They weren't really nursery schools, they were mostly playgroups that lasted for 3-hour sessions, and for a very small price you could have your child looked after, entertained and educated for a few hours to 2, 3, 4 times a week. There was one on Punchcroft, but it was always full because there were so many children, and my children went to Ash. Used to be a primary school many years before and was used as a playgroup, but you couldn't get there because most of us didn't have the use of a car. So there was a little blue bus, used to turn up at the bus stop in the centre, and you'd put the children on, aged 2.5, 3. They went there for 3 hours, and then at 12 o'clock you went and stood by the bus stop and they came back again and they all got off the bus.
We originally lived in Buckinghamshire. New Ash Green popped up in the Daily Mail as a new development, and as I come from Kent, we came down here to see what it was all about.
And we saw an ad in the Evening Standard for New Ash Green. And we went to Bovis house, set in the silver setting trees, and bought a house on a plan. It wasn't built at that time. We paid £50 deposit and bought a house in Capelands. We paid out £50, and that was in, I suppose, 1972. And we came down and saw how the house was being built over the time, and moved in 73.
We moved here really because we were looking for somewhere that we could afford to buy, and we stumbled on New Ash Green when we were looking for somewhere else, and immediately fell in love with it.
I was enchanted by the notion of the footpaths separated from the roads, and the place seemed full of happy people.
I sometimes describe New Ash Green, best I can describe it, it's like Centre Parks without the swimming pool.
What a place to live. I mean, when we first came, the village wasn't complete, of course, but it was like a university campus. It was fantastic.
The visits, on the other hand, the visits in Ash Green have always been a total disaster.
When you visited somebody, there would invariably be a neighbour who would go and get a prescription for them. There would be somebody who would offer to take them to the hospital or to cook a meal for them. And I think that really is the very warm heart of New Ash Green.
When I first arrived, I had a Citroen 2CV, and now you could literally pick it up, which in the winter, down at Redhill Wood and various other places, you actually had to. However, one of the big problems with Ash Green, as a doctor, as a visiting doctor, was the shrubbery. All the shrubs that grow up, go over all the house numbers, directions and everywhere else. Now when I first arrived, I did anger a few people because with my Citroen 2CV it was about the same size as a footpath. So if I didn't know where I was going, I just drove down the footpath, put the headlights on and beamed into the front door to see where the hell I was. Well, clearly in time you actually remember where all the houses are, because in those days we did do house visits.
When we first came to New Ash Green, I always felt it was a little bit like a university campus, but somebody thought about the fact that you had children and you needed a babysitting.
We moved to the village in 1984, having looked around. This was our third house We'd looked around other areas, and for value for money, this seemed to be a good deal.
Fantastic. I mean, amazing. Big windows, wonderful outlook, 2 toilets, a new house. We were overjoyed.
One of the really appealing things to me and my husband living in New Ash Green is the close proximity to Bluewater, to Swanley, to Dartford, to Gravesend, to the M20, to the Emma2. It's still near to our friends and our family back in the Bromley area. It's so good that you can be at the coast in less than an hour. You can take your child to the beach. You can be in town, and it's into London really easily, and that's great.
Yes, we bought it back then. It was all very original, and I loved it. We did get really good value for money, and it was in the countryside, so I'm more than happy.
The New Ash Green countryside is picturesque. The Minnis, the meadow, ancient woodlands and the orchard are all features which would be the envy of most villages developed in the late 20th century. And every season is special, from the spring bluebells that lead to the summer, and then the cobwebs of autumn, the storms and the winter snow, all bringing a different aspect to the ever-changing appearance of the village. But whatever the season, whatever the challenge, one thing has always been guaranteed: the spirit of the villagers to help each other and to work together.
New Ash Green sits right on the top of the North Downs and can be very, very cold. When we first moved in, we had several really very snowy winters. We were snowed in, literally.
I recall in the winter of 1981-2, I think it was, just after Christmas, it came with a vengeance, together with strong winds to make enormous drifts.
The roads in and out of the village were blocked down to Longfield and out through Ash for a number of days.
The snow was 2 and 3 feet deep. The icicles off the shops were huge things. And the children couldn't go to school. The men and all the women who had jobs couldn't go to work because nobody could get in or out of the village.
The milk tanker couldn't get through to the local farms, and Glovers very interestedly brought a Bowser up into the village and was dispensing milk from North Square.
The supermarket was laid siege very quickly and was empty, but we all had freezers and we all managed.
There were a number of people who were making sure that all their local residents or friends, or particularly the elderly, were adequately supplied with milk by effectively arranging their own milk deliveries. My boss didn't believe that I was cut off. Fortunately, the news showed the army dropping supplies in this part of Kent to cut off villages, at which point he had to believe me.
The overall infrastructure and facilities are the responsibility of the Village Association, who oversee the day-to-day running of the village. At the start, the Village Association office was located at numbers 5 to 7 Overminnis.
The original administrator, who was Melda White, who basically set up everything in the offices, she started in 1975, and when we moved in 1975, almost as soon as we got to our first house, which was Manor Forstall, we had a knock on the door from a resident of Manor Forstall welcoming us and asking if we would be interested in joining the Residents' Society. And consequently, my involvement as secretary led me to the door of 6 to 7 Overminnis, where Melda White had her office.
In 1987, Pat was asked to do holiday cover. She has remained there ever since. After moving into New Ash Green, Alan Pett found himself as part of the Lambards Committee with a responsibility for Hardlands.
Shortly afterwards, I was approached as to whether I would join the Village Association's Hardland Subcommittee, to which I agreed, and I was appointed the village lighting rep at a time when our street lighting was pathetic, with 100-watt filament bulbs creating tiny little puddles of light in the darkness. I was charged with the task of reducing the costs and walked around and surveyed every street column in the village as it was then, and concluded that, well, the best way to achieve cost saving was to turn the lot off because they weren't contributing very much, or alternatively to convert the columns to a different source of lighting, less energy consumption, and more light for the same money. So that's what we did.
Alan became chairman of the Village Association in 1986.
Eventually I had a contract for 12 hours a week, and it evolved from there on. We started in Overminnis, and then we eventually decided that a purpose-built office had to be built, hence Centre Road. And whilst we were here, we took offices upstairs above the co-op, which is there now. And we were up there for about 18 months, and then we moved down here. Eventually, I was here working a 5-day week.
When Melda White retired, Eileen Taylor took over and was in the post for just 11 months before sadly passing away. Pat took over the role of administrator at that time. Meanwhile, Brian Parlett hadn't given too much thought to village activities until he was introduced to Rowley Orr. This chance meeting led to the formation of the Ash Green Scouts.
I've grown up as a cub all the way through in central London in a troop in Holborn, and risen to the ranks of Senior Scout and then to Queen Scout. And Rowley, of course, pounced on this and sort of said, well, had you thought ever of giving some time back? From that point on, I was hooked.
Although there was initial interest in the village, it was still early days and the village was small. There simply weren't quite enough young people to form a scout pack.
Initially, the cub pack got going in New Ash Green, but as a third pack of the Longfield and Hartley's scout group. In 1972, the group was registered on the 1st of April and first met, I think, on the 23rd of April, very tellingly, as that was St George's Day.
Rowley registered the name of the scout group as Ash Green, in the knowledge that the name represented both the village of Ash and the new village of New Ash Green.
Every scout group wears a different coloured neckerchief or scarf, which, when we set up Ash Green, was white with a green border, an emerald green border.
When the group started in 1972, there were 6 boys, but with the expansion of New Ash Green, the number of members doubled within the year. This was to suddenly change during the dark years when Span went bust and Bovis took over. Margaret Bunningham was also involved.
One of the members that lived on Punchcroft, one of the new people, they were organising, you had jobs to do. So my job was to be in the Cubs. She just came out and knocked on your doors and said, OK, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm not doing little girls, that's for a start. I don't mind little boys. So I did the Cubs. I started as Bulgaria and then I became Arcada, so I did the Cubs for a few years. And my husband always played rugby.
For many years, the Scout minibus was seen around the village. It was presented to the pack by the lyricist Sir Tim Rice.
And the Cub Pack, enterprisingly, had come up with the idea of trying to raise money by making a mile of pennies. Somewhere along the line, some enterprising individual promoted by notifying the sponsors. They were so enamoured of this fundraising idea that we'd won their major fundraising award prize, and the group was presented with a minibus, which was absolutely great. We quickly had it painted in the group colours, the white and green. We set about trying to get sponsors for looking after the running costs of this vehicle, and emblazon the name of all the local sponsors on the back of the bus. And for many years it was seen around the village and involved in scouting activities.
The scouting movement continued to flourish. But what were the facilities if you happened to be a teenager at the start of the village?
Initially there were very few teenagers, lots and lots of toddlers and babies, and very few teenagers. And then the youth club materialised. I think in what is now the Oxfam shop or the unit next door, can't quite remember. That was a lot of fun.
When I first moved into New Ash Green, there were a lot of young professionals. It tended to be a premium priced housing environment compared with many other areas. And from that, it only needed one or two people to come up with an idea, and there would be a flock of people behind them supporting them.
I had my first paid jobs were working on what were then building sites around New Ash Green. I did some landscaping for Coblands Nurseries, I think, on Manor Forstall, must have been about 74 or 75. Did some turf laying and various bits and pieces. And then a couple of years later I did some labouring on Boweswood, Westfield and Oliver's Mill.
Throughout its life, New Ash Green has never been short of its dramas, and these often inspire the village spirit. This event, in the late 1970s, is typical of how the villagers work together for the benefit of the entire community.
Bovis had started to cut trees down in Redhill Wood prior to developing that area for building.
Somebody knocked on my door and said, "You've got to come. They're chopping down more trees than they're supposed to chop down when they're building the houses."
So we bundled into our duffel coats, double buggies, coats, and we rushed off down to Redhill Wood.
But before you come, you have to go and knock next door, and if there's nobody in, you just have to keep going to the next house until you find somebody. Tell them to come and tell them they have to go and find somebody else to come too.
And suddenly there were pushchairs, people walking, people on bikes, all going down Redhill Road to Redhill Wood.
And we sat underneath the trees.
But we saved the day and a lot of the woods were saved.
And as a result of that, almost it was a direct result, Sevenoaks District Council came out.
And one of my neighbours, Mick Jones, was responsible for getting a tree preservation order served in the course of one day, so that indeed Bovis had to not chop down as many trees as they had started to chop, and we still have the glorious woods that we can walk in now.
And they did impose an emergency tree preservation order on best part of Redhill Wood, which that order is still in place today.
This is just one example of the village community pulling together. But what are the other best times from the early days?
I think probably the 70s was the bestest time, in actual fact, because it was still alive and it was still happening.
For me personally, the highlight is the everyday highlight of being able to walk around the village and identify people as not being strangers. You may not know them intimately or even by name, but you know they are part of your community.
Other things I really enjoyed was actually in the early days of dancing in the street was a great excuse to stay up half the night, and we used to party quite a lot with our
other young mums and dads, and often until dawn. Now we still party quite, but not quite so often, and usually we've given up before midnight.
In 1985, local businessman Alan Harris and professional filmmaker Ted Davis produced a 15-minute video programme about New Ash Green called Village on the Hill.
One day the phone rang and it turned out to be an old friend of mine. And he said, well, there's a company run by a man called Alan Harris in a place called Kent. He's looking for somebody to work with him to start a film company in New Ash Green.
I got some video equipment set up in one of the offices we had in Ash House. So we set that up there, and then we took Ted on, and we ended up buying a house round in 7 acres, was it? Yeah. 55, 7 acres. But I think that the content was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
But the beauty of it was, this is where I think New Ash Green came into it. It was the people in New Ash Green that made it.
So I went down, met Alan, seemed a very amiable sort of chap, and he seemed to, he trusted me. Little did he know how little I knew about making films, but never mind. I managed to talk blather my way into getting a job with Alan, and for the next 2-3 years I was a filmmaker.
Today's village is a vindication of the ideals of its planners, architects and builders. With its 20 neighbourhoods, each with its own style and character, its leafy interconnecting footpaths, its woods and greens, it is a model of what can be achieved with sensitivity and imagination.
I remember the last time, it was about 6 months ago, I suppose, it was shown in the village hall, and out came an out voice from a bloke in the back. What about some sport? Because there's no sport in it, you see. Why? Because I personally was not interested in sport. And I said, it was a question and answer situation. And I said, simply because I made the film and I'm not interested in sport. At which there was a sort of positive reaction from the crowd.
And then I think the marvellous scene where you've got all the children in the school singing. And I just think that's really, for me, what New Ash Green was about.
Some of the scenes I wish I could go back to and cut. There was one in particular, near the beginning, when I'd taken the camera and put it down on the minute and just done a slow. Every time I see the film now, I sort of sit back and shudder, think, oh God, I wish I cut that down, It's too long. That's too long, that slow pan. It doesn't get anywhere, Why did I do that? Shouldn't have done that.
In the mid-1980s, long before any of us had heard of the internet or social media, the initial audience for The Village on the Hill was naturally fairly limited by modern-day standards. But for those of us who did see it, the film confirmed what is so good about New Ash Green and its people. It demonstrated how villagers all work together for the benefit of the whole village. This forms the central ethos of New Ash Green and makes the village unique. At the time that this film is nearing completion, Ash Church has a new rector, the Reverend Helen Reeves.
So I'm really loving living in New Ash Green. It's a beautiful place. The sense of community is awesome, and I'm just really keen to be involved and bring church into the centre of New Ash Green.
During the 50th anniversary year, the rector was the Reverend Ruth Oates.
And I was invited by the bishop to apply for the post here after Reverend John Peel retired, and the diocese had decided to sell the rectory in Ash Village and buy a property in one of the neighbourhoods in New Ash Green. So I now live in a rectory in Lambards.
I think that people in New Ash Green are very aware of the church building as somewhere that exists for special occasions. Weddings, christenings, maybe Christingle, yes, and then obviously, maybe funerals, though a lot of people would choose to go to the crematorium rather than come to the church.
choir is one thing which was in place before I came. I came to the village 33 years ago, and it had been set up by Marianne Simmons, who is still a member of our choir. But fundamentally, we're a church choir. We do traditional, essentially traditional music for the services week in, week out.
Since I've been here, certainly, I'm very aware that we pack this church out for St George's Day, so much so that the regular congregation don't have anywhere to sit.
And then, of course, as Christmas approaches, we'll have the Christmas Tree Festival and the Christingles and the carol services, all the things that we always have will be happening.
It's always been a lovely venue for musical events, whether that's choirs or organ recital, anything of that nature.
Since the 1990s, the Ash Church Choir have organised performances of well-known choral works. These have become very successful over the years, as it's given everyone the opportunity to take part in a big choral event.
And we decided we would rehearse it as a choir, just our 15 or so people. And the following Easter, whenever it was the mid-90s sometime, we would make it a public event. We would invite people to come and take part in it. And we would do it as an instant as far as they were concerned, but obviously we would have rehearsed it very thoroughly in the meantime. And we said to ourselves, if no one turns up, that's fine, we'll just sing it to ourselves. And we filled the church. It also enabled, and this was really the point, it enabled people in our choir and also outside in the community generally to take part in singing, which normally they wouldn't have been able to do. It gave them that opportunity. And when we advertised our instant in the early days to go outside the community, there were some eyebrows raised. But I think the inclusive aspect of that, making it available to people across a wide area, was actually quite important. It has got a distinctive nature. There's not a lot of classical music within New Ash Green, Ash and so on, and it has, over the years, brought that into the lives of local people.
The sound of the bells drifting from the church across the sports field to call the flock to prayer, or announcing a wedding, or ringing in the new year, was a delight to hear. We had a lovely surprise one year when the local potter decided to make a gotch for the ringers. Now, a gotch is a large traditional ceramic vessel in which ringers collected the undrunk remains of alcoholic beverages to make an interesting punch. Many youngsters in New Ash Green showed interest in bell ringing and learnt on Saturday mornings the basics of ringing to take into their adult life.
During the first 50 years, New Ash Green schools saw significant changes as the education systems changed throughout northwest Kent.
My eldest son started at the primary school when it was an infant and junior school, 5 to 7, then 7 to 11. And within a couple of years, it became a first school, 5 to 9, with the opening of the middle school, where Milestones is currently.
They were excellent, and they helped to provide a really good start in life for our kids.
And I never forget that one of my dad's highlights, he came on a school trip to the Science Museum, and in those days you didn't do a lot of school trips. My dad was unemployed for a short period of time, so he was available to come on a school trip, and we went up to the Science Museum to look at the printing exhibition, and because he was a printer. And he was partnered up with one of these little lads who was just, you know, just part of my little kind of gang at the time, you know. And at any other point in time, if you'd have said to my dad what was the highlight of your trip, it was this little boy that he would talk about at any other point. At any point you could just say Science Museum and he'd say,
That the deputy head at the middle school, Alan Chant, was a keen sailor. And he made arrangements for sailing at Gillingham Water Activity Centre to be one of the Wednesday afternoon sports. I wish I had such opportunities when I was young.
But we went through quite a difficult period in the 80s and 90s when it was very hard for parents to make the decisions about where to send their children to school.
We've been out to a barn dance in Stansted, and on the way back we could see this orange glow. So when we got back, Linda came inside and made sure that the children were all right and everything was okay, and the babysitters were at that point unaware of the problem. I picked up my camera. I thought I'd go and see if we could take some pictures of that. This point, of course, it's a major conflagration. I didn't take any photographs, so I spent my entire evening making tea from the equipment that we had over in the youth centre.
The fire, which happened at the end of the summer term, caused extensive damage to the school and personal property, and emergency plans were made in order to minimise disruption at the start of the autumn term. A major fundraising campaign began, and Lloyds Bank offered its facilities to the new fund. Local news broadcaster Peter Sissons presented a cheque to head teacher Mrs Anne Weeks.
And the first school had to be refurbished. There was unfortunately a big food poisoning outbreak a long time ago.
And children were farmed out as far as Hither Green Hospital. So all of the local hospitals, Joyce Green, were full of children that had got salmonella. My mum was a nurse, so I was allowed to stay at home because obviously my mum knew the doctor quite well, and he knew that if there were any issues, she'd have picked it up. So it was quite a kind of a big thing. Just how it affected so many people actually. But you know, it happened. We all got over it.
Throughout the life of the village, significant changes have taken place in the education provision. The new Ash Green First School became the primary school, and a totally new school, the Milestone Academy, took over the site previously occupied by the middle school.
The school originally was based in Milestone Road in Dartford in Kent, and in the late 90s moved to what was the home of New Ash Green Middle School. Milestone Academy is what is known as a PSCN school. A PSCN school is a school that serves pupils with profound, severe and complex needs.
Milestone Academy is a member of the highly successful Lee Academies Trust.
We have over 200 staff for our 330 pupils. About 40 of those staff lead classes, and then the next 150, 160 staff then on top of that support those classes. They can either be TAs or what we call higher level teaching assistants, and any other type of support that we feel is necessary for our students as well. We're very proud as an academy to belong to the Lee Academies Trust, and as such to enable us to have grown as we have over the last, particularly over the last 5 years, we have now taken on 3 further satellites. What we try and do throughout the school is live to what we call our core moral purpose. Our core moral purpose is a public promise that we give to families, and it's based on saying to one and all, when you send your son and daughter, we will make sure that we have the highest expectations. In our core moral purpose as well, you can see that we explicitly say that learning doesn't just occur inside the classroom, but occurs outside the classroom. So therefore we are very open about the fact that we are committed to making pupils not only academic progress, but critically personal progress as well. We're also really pleased as well that our pupils, as part of their learning experience going into New Ash Green, where they're warmly welcomed by so many of the shop holders and also the general community, and that adds no end to our pupils' experiences and knowledge of life.
From the start of the village through to the 1980s, it would have been necessary to climb this staircase to go and see Peter Reed the doctor or Bill Reed the dentist, as this is where their surgeries were located. Dr. Andy Dodd was a friend of Bill's at King's College, London.
One of the things about the first surgery was it was upstairs in New Ash Green. We had a doctor's surgery which was basically a waiting room, a studded wall partition, and then another surgery. Everybody could hear what was happening in the one surgery who was in the waiting room. Didn't seem to matter. We never got a comment from anyone.
Before I had my family, I was actually a nurse at St Bartholomew's Hospital in London. I was asked if I might go and help out one day at the surgery. Both the nurses that they had at the time couldn't run the clinic.
General practice began to change a bit. The politicians became more involved. The next progression in terms of the practice was fund holding, and at that time we seized the opportunity.
As a doctor, when I first came to the area, I was very aware that there was this disparity between New Ash Green, Hartley and Longfield. And there were some barriers. People would not move between the two surgeries because they felt there was this diversity. But over the years, that's gone. I did a couple of sessions towards the end of the year, and a bit later on, a few months later, I was asked if I would actually like to go and work regularly at the surgery.
Yeah, we went for fund holding with both hands. So part of the reason for that was that New Ash Green, Longfield, Hartley represented around about 10% of the patients of Dartford and Gravesend. But we were very distant in terms of geography. We weren't part of the Dartford Gravesend consortium. So we very much stood out on our own, even though we were a significant minority, if you like, of patients in the area. And we felt that by doing fund holding, we could bring services into our area, we could modernise it, and basically do innovations that weren't available otherwise.
I went on several courses, got more and more involved with the job, took on more hours, ended up eventually working 5 days a week, albeit only sort of less than a full-time, but not much less than full-time.
The doctor's surgery was right opposite Bill Reed, who was the dentist's surgery, and we often communicated, walked across, had a bit of coffee together. It was a lovely time to start a general practice.
So I set up in New Ash Green as in practice in Upper Street South, right opposite the doctor's surgery. It was upstairs as well at that time, and ran that with Margaret Birmingham, who is Mrs. Wonderful.
And from there I went upstairs to the dental practice, where they started the dental practice. I went up there and started with Bill Reed, who was the first dentist here.
She did everything, including keeping me working when I wanted to go flying and all the other things I wanted to do.
Now, the general practice got matured. We moved to another practice. Peter Smith was instrumental in developing the new practice. And as such, the population began to get older, we began to get older, the children began to get older.
As a doctor, one of the reflections I would have is the sociological change that's happened over the decades. The vast majority of women were at home, and that was very true as well at Ash Green, which made it a very cohesive, terrific network of friends.
We had the highest birth rate at the time of children and the lowest number of elderly patients, or patients over the age of 65.
Sadly, more and more women have worked. That isn't a comment, because obviously I was a working woman, but because of that, there have been less sort of cohesive groups around the village. But I still felt, even at my retirement, that warm heart was there in New Ash Green. Yes, there aren't many people left in New Ash Green and Longfield who haven't either been stabbed, dressed, ear syringed, or other procedures done by me.
I just think that the practice has been so much a reflection of my life and my family's life, and I loved every minute of it. Well, that's not true. I loved most minutes of it, and I just hoped that when I retired that the practice would continue to mature.
And I go in regularly to Turner's Oak, which is our sheltered housing, and we still have a warden at Turner's Oak, which is pretty good.
And of course, the old people aren't forgotten by any means.
It's 1986. Turner's Oak is 10 years old, and the warden is Shirley Knott.
Well, Turner's Oak is run by Anchor Housing Association, which is a housing association that provides sheltered housing for elderly people. The idea is that they live as independently as they desire, but there's an overall security of a warden on site. Coming to New Ash Green, it helped balance the community quite a lot because there were very many young families and not so many of the older generation. And it's a situation that's worked very well because we've received a lot of help from young families in the village. We've adopted grannies, had an adopted granny scheme, and people come in offering help of any kind.
Fast forward to 2017, and Turner's Oak is still providing a valuable service to the senior citizens in the community.
My name's Lolita Chop. I'm the scheme manager at Turner's Oak here. I've been here for about 6-7 years, and my main job is actually looking after the residents.
Well, what do I say? We haven't many staff, but the staff we had is a very nice lady, and she looks after us and makes us comfortable, and always sees we get to the doctors on time when we're ill and so on. So she's a very nice lady, Lolita.
So if they have any issues in the morning, they can come and see me, and then we try to dress them as best as we can.
The manageress is wonderful.
It's a great place. It's got the best of both worlds, really, because you can either be in your own flat or it can be part of the community.
As everything's in the area, yeah, it's close. So you get to know a lot of people.
Good little community, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, pub lunches. We go up the White Swan where you can get a good meal. Don't you go there, Patsy, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, get a good meal up there and have a meal. I get friends coming over here and we go up there for a meal.
I absolutely love my job, and I think it's a lovely place to work, and it's a rewarding job.
5:25.
Every week we have bingo on a Thursday afternoon, and the nice thing about that is that people can come together, but we also invite people from outside the scheme, so it's a community activities as well. Okay, we have Ash Church that comes in once a month.
I was in the choir, but I seemed to drown the choir out.
And for one gentleman I can think of, it gave him the courage to join with us in our monthly service that we hold in Turner's Oak.
Yes. So that's good for people who can't actually go to church, so church comes to us.
We've had the carol singers in here, haven't we, and bell ringers. That was good, campanologists, they come in here. 3 years ago that was.
And I then started bell ringing. That hurt my eyes and I looked a bit dodgy. I had to keep going up those towers and they look a bit dodgy to me, so I paid that out. But I still go to church, and Ash Church.
And also we have the choir service that come here through the winter months when they can't actually hold the practices in the church because it's so cold. So they come over, so they use our facilities here.
Yeah, basically, living in a flat in Turner's Oak has the advantage because you've got the choice. You can be on your own, or you can communicate with people. Come down and have a tea, coffee.
When he first approached us to do the 50th anniversary, the first came to mind was a gentleman in his 90s, and he was the first person who said that he would be in the video. Unfortunately, Bob passed away earlier on this year, and he always said he absolutely loved it here, and he's so glad he came here and he chose Turner's Oak.
When the first neighbourhoods were built, no one had heard of drones. They would have been regarded as objects of science fiction. But by the 50th anniversary year, these small flying machines had become commonplace and were becoming an excellent means of getting photographic images of the village, in particular a bird's eye view of the ancient woodland and the meadow.
Interestingly, the Woodlands group seems to be thriving, and I wonder if that is because there is a renewed interest in the surroundings and the fact that families want to be involved together as well. So that's been something that I've been very pleased to see really thriving, and yeah, that's something really good, isn't it?
And on the meadow they've been doing a survey where they put flat pieces of felt down for lizards to hide under, and in the sunshine the lizards come out and bask on them. I had no idea there were lizards down there.
I joined the VA Greenland Committee in early 2000s, and one of the areas of the village that struck me as having been kind of neglected then was the orchard. It had become completely overgrown. After a bit of rooting around and talking to lots of people and talking to experts around the county, we decided that it might be worth having a go setting up a volunteer group.
Well, I became involved along with my wife Carol because we had the general call for help from Jerry Ash, who kind of initiated helping regenerate the orchard. So we kind of rushed in to join the fun, and there were about 60 people that turned up on that first day. And after that, seeing the enthusiasm, Jerry decided to make it a more formal group, and Carol and I kind of stepped up with him to form the nucleus of the group.
And as we were lucky as a group, we managed to get a grant, and that was when the group was formed. Lots of people on our distribution list, and we get a good group along each time we meet on the third Saturday each month.
We're normally focusing on the orchard, but today we're working in the meadow, and that has been inspired by one of our younger members, Sean, who is actually trained as a kind of conservationist, biologist, and he has an interest in surveying the meadow.
So currently we just found some rocks here which are really great habitat for slow worms and reptiles and things like that. So we're taking off all the high nutrient kind of nettles, things like that out here, which are really quite good for wildlife, but they're not great for every single species. They're only good for butterflies, things like that. So what we're going to do, take away all the nettles here, catch lots of sun, and then we'll try and get some other wildflowers growing.
One of the great things for me is the rugby club. I joined, I didn't play rugby particularly well, but I did play every year for about 5 years for the rugby club in various low teams. But what was really good for me and for us was the social life of the rugby club.
And I also worked at the old shack on the sports field long before any pavilions were built, which was fun. It was great.
Members of the rugby club seemed to me to run pretty much everything else in the village. If you were into amateur dramatics, some of the senior members of the amateur dramatics were rugby club. If you were in the church, some of them were rugby club.
And of course in those days I think there was a lot more involvement by the residents because everybody moved down here because they really wanted to move here.
I remember during the early days when we needed to bring in a second pitch into effect, that with the whole family, that's me and my wife and 3 of our 4 children, were out crawling on our hands and knees across the pitch, stone picking every weekend until eventually we got all the flints out so that we could actually play on the pitch.
Yes, the cricket club was one of the most distinctive things I found about the village when I came 30 odd years ago, and it was very much a village cricket club. It was located on the sports field, which people still have the habit of calling the rugby club, but I mean it was much more than that. It was rugby, cricket, football and so on.
Eventually we got fed up with this old contractor's hut, and we managed to raise enough money and raise loans from Shepherd Neame so that we could build a much bigger rugby club house, which we did, and we did it ourselves.
With the rugby club, we got very involved in fundraising to build the original, well, to build the first new pavilion.
I particularly remember when it was finally finished, the vicar came, that was David Springthorpe, and I remember him blessing the building and saying, unless the Lord buildeth the house, he that buildeth it in vain, which I thought was very moving, but didn't actually protect the rugby club, because a few months later there was a fire and the whole thing burnt down.
Then once again we started fundraising again to build the current one.
And as for Dr. Reed,
I remember one time Tommy Kramer came up to him and he goes, "Here, Pete," he said, "a word with you for a minute." And Dad goes, "Yeah." He says, "Pete," he says, "can you do anything about me cauliflower ear?" And Dad goes, "Yeah." He says, "Have you tried cheese sauce?"
And when I was match secretary for the rugby club, which I was for all those years, and people used to send cards and letters in those days instead of emails, it used to go, "Margaret, house nearest to the rugby club, New Ash Green," and the postman would deliver it, because that's what it was like in those days, you know.
Nowadays, cricket has moved to Hartley, but rugby, tennis and football continue at the club and are still going strong. The sports field hosts many of these sports. One of the newest additions is the New Ash Green Predators, an under-17 who are part of the New Ash Green Junior Football Club. Adjacent to the Rugby Club Pavilion is one of New Ash Green's 7 children's play areas.
As I say, New Ash Green is a great place for children to play in. And we have these wonderful woods and wonderful fields. I can't think of any better place to bring up the family than New Ash Green.
No matter where you are in the village, most neighbourhoods have access to a playground within a short walking distance.
I love that each neighbourhood has a small play area for our children, really near. So we are in the middle, between the slide park, is what we call it, and the helicopter park, which I think is what generally people call them. And so we can go to either one really easily. That's great.
Another family that moved within New Ash Green were Jackie and Alan Richardson.
But we moved to Knightscroft, and Knightscroft was such a nice place to be. We had a lovely green outside the front, and there were children in all the houses along our row, and they all used to play out on the green, and it was just such a great place. And you could watch them from the kitchen window, so they were allowed on the little green in front of the house. If they wandered off, they were brought in.
And it was a wonderful place to raise your children. It was safe, they could play outside with lots of other children, and because there were so many children and so many women at home with their children, the doors were always open.
One of the most recent additions to the children's recreation parks is hidden in a tiny section of grassland behind some of the original span houses in Knightscroft, so hidden in fact that it's known as the Secret Garden.
So the Secret Garden is an outdoor area which allows children to interact with and explore nature using all of their senses. So it was set up to provide somewhere unique for the children of New Ash Green. Children are really enjoying going to the Secret Garden and just spending time there, playing in the mud kitchen, getting filthy, bringing along painted stones and other decorations to hang from the trees. So the kids are getting really involved, and it's been a really positive thing for Knightscroft and New Ash Green.
One of the great things about New Ash Green is you end up knowing so many people who do so many interesting things that we can all work together as a community.
And one of those interesting people was Valerie Dyke, who for many years was head of music at Gravesend Grammar School for Girls. It was Valerie who was responsible for the setting up of Music Workshop, which catered for villagers of all ages and had groups which included choirs, string groups, wind groups, recorder ensembles and many others.
We enjoyed bringing up our children in New Ash Green, and the children actually, I've asked them later, and they really enjoyed their childhood.
New Ash Green has many groups for dance and for music which meet regularly. One of the most important is New Ash Green Music Workshop.
They joined lots of clubs. So there was, when they were little, there was Music Workshop. And then, of course, as they got older, Charlie was the right age to join a brand new company, brand new society called Act One Scene One.
I started reading scripts written for teenagers and thought, very arrogantly, I think I can do better than that. So I sat down and started to write. Then the next thing I heard was my husband Chris on the phone speaking to a local reporter saying she's going to set up a company and do a teenage show. I got in contact with a young chap called Cliff Masterson, who was a student at Chris's school, a very, very excellent young composer.
So I actually didn't live in New Ash Green, I lived near Gravesend, but I came to be part of the group because my music teacher at St George's School was Chris Tingley, and of course he was married to Sid Ralph, who was the founder of Act One Scene One. I recently won the Kent Young Composer competition, and Sid was aware of what I was doing and she liked what I was doing, so she asked if I might go and have a meeting, and we talked about putting together a show for people in the area and how we might be able to do something that was relevant for everybody and inclusive of everybody.
We had a script and we had a tape of a lot of the songs that Cliff had written. We read the script, we played the tape, and I said, so are we up for this? And they all said yes.
Shortly after she joined and they'd done their first show, I came in to help, and she asked me first of all to help with props, and then after that I became her stage manager.
Well, the result was that we put this first piece, which we rehearsed, into a competition called the Barclays Music Theatre Awards. Went up to the Queen Elizabeth Hall and we smashed it. We won. I was absolutely delighted. This meant that the company suddenly took off, and it gave us a means of asking for grants, which people were very kindly giving us, for our next show, which I then started writing. Our second piece was Lumpy Custard, which eventually went up to the Edinburgh Festival. We took piles of people up with us, and some wonderful adults who supported us through the whole process, and performed at the George Square Theatre.
And that actually was selected as being one of the top 10 most interesting titles for a show during that time at the Fringe. I always think it's really interesting how these things have a habit of coming around, and in Lumpy Custard, one of the sequences was Slipway, which was sort of a spoof advert that the character writes during the show.
Most Act One Scene One productions had filmed in sets to help complement the action which was going on stage.
And it was an advert for a shopping centre where the shopping slid straight down this slipway into the boot of your car rather than having to go for a shopping trolley.
In the case of Lumpy Custard, the sequence was shot in the car park just behind what was at the time Lloyd's Bank during a cold Sunday afternoon in November. Don Kennedy helped create the illusion that this in fact was a real shopping experience. At the time, Sid had a Citroën 2CV in a colour scheme that was called Plums and Custard. It had miles of potential as a comedic car.
So I sat in the car as the wife knitting, and Jeff sort of moved about and fidgeted and oversaw what was going on, and we had this scene where I was nagging at him and carrying on knitting, and he was answering back, and also there were scenes of the goods flying over the wall and coming back into the car.
Back then, no one had heard of someone phoning in their order and then driving to a delivery area to receive it. At the end, there was complete retail carnage, and Jeff goes for the full condemnation.
The third show then became Breaker's Yard, which is based in an idea I had about a magic maker, a young person who could con everybody into believing in his dreams.
It's where I come in. Jack Breaker, seller of rainbow dreams. At your service.
I think that because Act 1, Scene 1 had kind of left other competitors standing in their tracks, the Barclays Awards organisers decided to change the categories, so that when it came to the Breaker's Yard entry, we won again, but this time it was for the most outstanding musical performance. But, just like the other shows, it went on to perform once again at that year's Canterbury Festival.
I think my favourite was Game Boy, which I wrote again with Cliff. At the time I was utterly computer phobic. So I started investigating how young people felt about their computers. The fact that some people became isolated, they were not communicating with one another. In fact, we were way ahead of what everyone's now talking about, and the young people are like this all the time. This would be 1992, and we were already talking about it.
One of the brilliant things about Act 1 Scene 1 is it was totally inclusive. Anybody in the village who wanted to get involved, they just came along initially to Sid and Chris's front room, and then obviously to the village hall, and everybody was given an opportunity to do something, to try something, whether it was, you know, acting, singing, or even behind the scenes doing set design or lighting or sound. You know, a theatre company is made up of a lot of different people with a lot of different skills, and all of those skills were found in the village.
We had three patrons, Graham Cole from the Bill, Richard Stilgo and Jeremy James Taylor, who enabled us to take a few kids over to do the Jersey Youth Theatre version of Full Circle. Graham Cole took all the kids along to the Bill set, where we played with cameras and everything. It was just fantastic. Richard did a huge amount for the company. A lot of the youngsters and some of the other kids from the village joined me for production of Under Mill Wood, which was put on by the Orpheus Trust and starred Richard. We also worked with Nick Cleabury, the conductor, and we also joined him and his festival, Sounds New Festival, in a new opera production, which was Sirens for the Canterbury Festival. I also took some of the very small members up to Buxton to play in a production of Goodnight Mr. Tom, which was part of the Quest for a New Musical Festival. So all in all, those youngsters, I wanted to make it inclusive so they could come out with me when I was working professionally. No matter what time of year, the village always has something new to offer. But for many of the villagers, it's the daily routine known as dog walking. Yes, that's right. Walkies!
I eventually went back to walking the dog in the woods, which is the greatest asset to where I live, and I just adore, that's my favourite part of the day, is walking Bonnie, as I have now, who is my 6th Labrador.
And that's a lovely feeling, and you get to know people, and it's lovely just to walk around the village, walking with the dog, and saying hello to people, and being able to recognise them, and sometimes even remember their names. It's lovely.
I haven't had a dog before, and I've had him for 2 years, and taking him out walking, we go down to the meadow, and you see the seasons changing. You know, the spring flowers come, and then the grass grows up, and then the blackberries come, and the leaves change colour, and it's just lovely, always something different.
For some of the dogs and their people, the daily exercise routine has further developed into a weekly social activity, and there surely can be no better place to hold it than the rugby club.
After I retired, we used to walk over here. Jill and I used to walk our dogs over here regularly, and one summer day we just sat here and had a drink and said, oh, this is nice, we'll have a drink while the dogs play. And then another fella joined us, and another person joined us, and then it got larger and larger, and we just, it was always invitation only. We would know somebody and say, would you like to bring your dog over? Which is what's happened, and we're still here all those years later.
Well, it's quite a pet-friendly village, really. Everyone seems to have animals and what else. So, yeah, we bring our dogs up to the pavilion. We like a nice walk around, even on the pathways around the roads and stuff. It's sort of, being here 28 years, I still get sort of lost when we go out for a good walk.
New Ash Green is wonderful for the kids. They're free to run, but not only good for kids, it's also great for the parents, the mums and the dads. It's a small community, and therefore the shopping centre has a friendly village atmosphere.
And this was certainly the case when The Village on the Hill was filmed in 1985. There were lots of ideas in the original plans that didn't necessarily come to fruition. One was the original concept of the clock tower.
The tower was always there, and it was included within the shopping centre designed by Span as a viewing point, and the idea was that villagers, presumably without charge, would be able to go up and look around panoramically over the whole of their domain.
I'm a great advocate of New Ash Green as a place to live, a place to work even for many people. But there is one thing that has pulled it back a bit over the years, and that is the shopping centre.
They've got all the usual shops in New Ash Green. You've got a chemist, a butcher, a supermarket that's always well stocked, post office, and then things like the flower shop. It's just gorgeous to walk past there, all the lovely flowers.
There have been shops in the village from the beginning, when Ron Brown's Interiors and Martin's were originally found on Over Minnis. In addition to those shops mentioned in The Village on the Hill, at its peak, there were banks, a building society, pet shop, Donaldson's Hardware, a laundrette, Calico, a delicatessen, Cara's, Pandora's Box, clothes shops and lots more. The retail area occupied 2 levels of the row. In the 1990s, the completed shopping centre was opened by Sue Pollard.
I feel sad when I go to the shops because when we first came here, all those little shops were open. We had a wonderful greengrocer's, a wet fish shop, a butcher's, and it was lovely. You could get everything, and everything was nice.
We had Avis's Antique Centre, which was a bit of a cafe as well. We had Ron Brown's interior design shop. Now that was lovely, especially in late November, where he used to give out the Beaujolais Nouveau.
And another feature within the shopping centre design was the rainwater from the shops was to be collected and is collected and conveyed down into the orchard, where the original Span master plan showed 2 or 3 ponds or lakes, one of which I think was to be intended as a boating lake.
The shops were developed by Span initially, taken over by Bovis when Span went out of business. And the original concept was, just like the residential neighbourhoods, to set up a centre society that would represent all the shop owners. Unfortunately, there were a number of problems with the centre. The shops tended to leak. They have leaked ever since. And as a result of that, the maintenance costs began to escalate. And the Centre Society was in a position where it had to keep asking for more and more money from its tenants. The outcome of that was that the Centre Society felt it could not continue, and it wound itself up, meaning that all the responsibilities went back to the landlords. So it is a great shame. It means that we don't have the opportunity to make a lot of the improvements that we can. Having said that, I have been working with the town team, which was set up to apply for some Mary Portas funding for the centre.
Hello, I'm Cameron Clark. I'm one of the 3 district councillors for Ash and New Ash Green at Sevenoaks District Council, and I'm also a director of New Ash Green Village Association. I'd like to introduce our shopping centre to you as part of our bid for the Portas Pilot Scheme.
In 2011, after some years of neglect, New Ash Green submitted a proposal for funding from the Portas Pilot Scheme.
I'd say for the first 20 years of its existence, it was a thriving retail environment, and it's something that the community needs, not only as a place to shop, but also as a place to meet your neighbours.
The centre is pedestrianised and within easy walking distance from the homes of some 7,000 people.
We saw also obviously a move in the retail environment from shops locally, as every other town and village has had, to people tending to shop in supermarkets, hypermarkets. So
because to be quite honest with you, the shops aren't that great.
Now, with over half the shops disused, the village centre can at times seem rather ghostly. But there are still several long-standing businesses thriving here, and there are also a few new additions to the New Ash Green family.
So that took away the footfall from the village for the community bookshop, the butchers, the veg shop, the toy shop, and people like Ron Brown Interiors, who just couldn't exist in the current footfall.
The village started as a model town, an example of what a self-contained village could be. And with the help of the Portas pilot, New Ash Green could become a shining example once again.
So I guess I'll stay another day, if it means
We didn't get one of the big grants, but we did get a little bit of money, and with the help of that, with a lot of help from the economic development team at Sevenoaks Council, and also from the Village Association and other people, we have been trying to make some improvements in the centre. At this time we can't really say what will be happening because we don't know, but the shopping centre is coming towards the end of its life. There are more and more problems appearing. Something will have to be done. The owners know that, the council knows that. We are still working together with them to try to bring some improvements, and I really hope that within the next few years we will see a lot happening.
The village pub, the Badger, is situated at the end of the row and has an entrance that leads straight from the Minnis. It's a great asset to the village as the licensees go out of their way to provide facilities for celebrating special occasions. It's also very close when functions are being held in the village hall. New Ash Green has always provided a colourful backdrop to private parties and neighbourhood parties. Since the start, the various neighbourhoods have celebrated special occasions, such as the 1977 Silver Jubilee.
Silver Jubilee 1977, just 2 years after we'd moved into our house in 1975. And my youngest child was about 15 months old, and on Jubilee Day he stood up and walked. He finally managed it, walked for the Queen. And we did lots of other things for the Queen, and Lambards held a party, and we took over the village hall, and everybody dressed in red, white and blue, and we had paintings all round the walls. I can remember one little boy, son of a neighbour of ours, had hands up for the Queen, and he had red, white and blue handprints all over a piece of paper that was stuck on the village hall wall. And we had afternoon tea, and we played games, and I can't remember if we sang songs, but we probably did. And alcohol was probably taken towards the end of the day, but we all had an absolutely glorious time to celebrate the Silver Jubilee for the Queen.
Village Week has been a feature of village life throughout its 50 years. This year saw some old favourites and some new activities planned for the anniversary.
So for the 50th celebration of the village, there were a range of different activities and events going on, and we've been part of a bigger kind of project for a while. We as an orchard come woodlands group, we've been part of the Kent Orchards project run by a lady called Pippa Palmer. She invited herself, if you like, to come to us with this lovely event called the Enchanted Orchard. Didn't really know what to expect, but we said yes, we're happy to host it, please come along, what do you need us to do? And in fact we didn't really need to do very much except provide the community orchard, and she brought storytellers and musicians and face painting for the kids and homemade apple produce, so cakes and drinks and whatever.
Bigger and bigger and bigger, and they all flew away.
The Woodlands group, you know, helped to erect the gazebos and wandered around looking as if it was our event, but in fact it was part of this bigger project, and we were really grateful they came, because what it did was it showcased the orchard that we love so much to a much wider audience. And from that we got some more members for the Woodlands group, but particularly what we got was just a wider awareness of the beautiful parts of the village.
One of the other things to do, which I did, which involved my wife, Jean, who later became part of the practice as well, as Dr. Herring, we enrolled in Act 1.
I was in the laundrette in the centre of the village, and pasted on the wood cladding on the inside of the laundrette was a notice that said, would you like to come along for a meeting to start a drama group?
I remember going to the first show and just thinking how original and vibrant it was.
And so I went to the very first meeting of the creation of the drama group, which was called Act 1.
Soon enough I was quite heavily involved in writing, and particularly writing songs, and just stayed ever since.
Chris Watson was also a long-serving member.
I got involved with Act 1 partly by somebody, John Manley in particular, happened to notice I was painting a play school Wendy house in the middle of my sitting room, and subsequently I got co-opted onto the Act 1 committee in my absence while I was on holiday, and I've been a committee member ever since.
We always had a review almost every year, and different themes, always a lot of local satire, which the New Ash Green audience enjoyed.
Such excitement when the travel agent takes the money, or you mention Mount at Gatwick, when you board the crowded plane to call you plastic food, plastic
But I do other things. I take my songs out on the folk scene in Kent, and that's always been something I like, and so that tends to be my focus these days.
For the 50th anniversary, Act 1 Drama Group, always ready to find a topical subject, staged their review 50 Shades of Green as their contribution to the anniversary. As usual, this was presented in the village hall.
And brimstone flew with orange tips, whites tangled round the green, and all at once a comma.
One of the many attractions was a photographic and art display entitled The Shape of New Ash Green. This exhibition featured the work of Sass Harding and Sam Hickman.
We'd been wanting to work together for a while on a project sort of to combine paper art and photography, and then when it came up that it was the village's 50th, it just seemed like a really good opportunity. Well, I learned loads about the history when it was built, kind of having to research everything, because we picked particular neighbourhoods that were the first ones to be built.
Having lived here so long, like there's lots of nostalgic places and signs and things, so it was easy for me to relate and be inspired by things to use. Having spent my childhood here, it's very nostalgic, but It's a really nice environment to be in. It's a great community, and I think it has a lot to offer. And I've got lots of family here and lots of friends from my childhood years, and we've all kind of grown up together.
Because all the celebrations were happening, it was nice that I could come to the village association with an idea and then go, yeah, great, go away and do it, and then sort of to have all, like, we just were in control of it, and it was great.
A painted lady in her flight appeared to stop and think, resting in the sunshine, white and black and...
In addition to this exhibition, there were also further exhibits from the New Ash Green Primary School.
A pretty ringtone softly rang, and I was not alone.
A few days later, and the village hall was to host another theatre production. This time it was 2 performances of a special adaptation of Robin Hood as a summer pantomime.
So kind. In fact, she's been looking out for me.
Yes, I know you don't want to settle down and marry anyone.
One of the highlights of the village calendar is Village Week, an annual event held in early summer. This culminates with Village Day, which in 1972 was held on the fields that would later become the neighbourhood Pennenden. As this was such a large event for what at the time was such a small village, it was opened that year by Tony Blackburn, seen here with villager Tim Blackmore. Village Day has been one of the main focal points of the village year throughout its 50 years. Since the early days, it has been the responsibility of the village's social committee, known as NAG Social.
So one of the key things about the NAG Social Committee now, it's made up of a great bunch of individuals. And Village Day, which is our absolute core event, we got Dan Lillycrop putting that event on for us, has done for the last couple of years, and again, an absolute fantastic job.
Village Fair on the Minute was always good fun. Round Table often provided the human fruit machine, a fiendishly uncoordinated team of 3 people, plus their minders, who pulled out illustrations from each box of various fruit in a completely random manner, just like the mechanical or the electronic ones, but much more fun.
And what's nice is we kind of extend that out through Facebook and the rest of it as well. And you actually get the feeling of that the village appreciates it, gets involved and joins in. It's grown. It's grown every year. It's actually started making profit again, which is great, which means that we can give money back to some great causes. And of course, particularly the fireworks displays got bigger, Village Days got bigger. And it's become a fabulous event. Of course, it's also got a classic car show in it as well now, so it's becoming quite well known across the county.
One of the regular groups to contribute to Village Day is the Silvera Dance School. Established in 1946, it's been operating in New Ash Green since 1992, providing classes in ballet, tap, jazz, street, contemporary and musical theatre. Silvera currently teaches around 250 children in the village. It's the younger children who dance in the arena on Village Day every year.
Brilliant. How do you do it?
I don't really know.
I think on behalf of Silvera School of Dancing, who are brilliant and support us every year, the entire audience and everyone on the field wants to give you a huge round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen.
Now a village tradition, the children absolutely love it. NAG Social is also responsible for the annual fireworks display.
Our fireworks event has absolutely grown year on year. We've got a professional company in there to light all the fireworks. No more running around with a taper and the fear of losing our heads.
We always looked forward to the bonfire night on the field next to the Minute, and we often provided wholesome food like jacket potatoes and some form of barbecue to warm up the souls who were willing to brave the incredibly cold evening for a wonderful display and a really big bonfire.
Very, very much focused now on the safety aspects of that and the crowd safety and things like that, so much more professional.
everyone.